r/no sleep. Posted by you/02321. I work as a CSI. Part 7. A small town murder. Hi friends. I created a playlist for this series. Please check out. Time passed with my eyes closed and yet I didn't fall asleep. After a while, I sensed eyes looking at me and knew better than to stay still. I rolled off the bed and to the other side of the room within a second. My heart was working overtime as I looked up at the creature that suddenly appeared over my bed. It stood on the ceiling as if it was the floor. The clawed feet stuck fast to the old roofing. The creature was wrapped in rags, making it hard to see the body type. Large bat-like wings were pinned tight against the creature's body. The skin was a deep cracked brown. A set of red glowing eyes landed on me, and the monster smiled so wide it could have bitten off my entire head if it wanted. What a quick little agent you are. You may calm down. I am not after your life. This is just a warning visit. I am telling you to stay out of this case. We do not require outsiders like yourself to deal with matters that are none of your concern. The creature spoke in a low and weak voice. I tried placing it, but it didn't sound like the three I'd met so far. I glanced over to see Yates hadn't moved. I doubted this thing was Maggie, so that left Ward. But I wasn't sold on this monster being that man either. You were the one who ate part of Laura, didn't you? I pressed my back against the cold stone wall. The monster's smile somehow grew even wider as if it felt proud of that fact. But you didn't kill her, I said with sweat starting to drip down the side of my face. The creature gave me a curious look, wondering why I would ever suggest such a thing. It forced a menacing expression back into its grim face. Oh? How strange of you to notice. You must have discovered the bullet holes in the porch. Here I've heard agents simply shoot first and ask questions later. I didn't think you were actually documenting the scene. This creature must have assumed I was at the scene as an intimidation tactic. Or wasn't skilled enough at gathering evidence to notice how Laura really had been killed. The corporation didn't deal in trials. They killed creatures on sight if they were a danger to humans. There were some exceptions to that rule, but not many. Why would I bother recording a scene if I was just going to kill the creature regardless of what I discovered? I wanted to question this creature further, but shouting drew my attention away. I heard Ward's and Maggie's voices. When I looked back, the creature was gone. I hurried out of the cells to the main office. Ward had been dragging Maggie by her arm and Yates just got up to stop him. The older man let go before Yates acted. Maggie went behind a desk, her face filled with panic and her hand hovering over her sidearm. What's going on? I demanded, trying not to sound too harsh to upset Maggie further. I woke up and she was Ward started, but Maggie butted in. I was watching the cameras on Ward's computer. I heard voices and wanted to see who you were talking with, and I saw it. Only a brief flash, but it was the same thing that was eating Laura. She choked out. I didn't know how to explain myself. Ward gave a raised eyebrow, unsure of what to think. He didn't trust me but didn't believe that I was speaking with something not exactly human. Women are too damn emotional. You saw your friend getting eaten by some sort of animal and snapped. This is why girls should never do a man's job. Ward grumbled, arms crossed. Years of frustration over working with such a man finally came to a breaking point. Maggie pulled out her handgun and aimed it at her boss. I took a few steps closer, but Yates cut me off. It wasn't wise getting near to Maggie while she thought I wasn't on her side. Shut your damn mouth. I've done everything around here while you sat on your fast ass and harassed every girl in sight. If I didn't see that monster, I would have thought you were the one who killed Laura for rejecting you, she shouted back, the gun in her hand trembling. That bit of new information was another part of the puzzle. At that time, I thought I knew what happened and why we all found ourselves trapped inside the building. My stomach twisted with dread. Everything that happened next was far too fast for me to react. She was a slut, that. Ward started to speak, but Maggie pulled the trigger. A small pop came, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he drew his handgun and shot twice. Yates went down after a bullet tore through his left eye. Something hit my shoulder and I fell against a desk, suddenly unable to breathe due to pressure. By the time I stood back up with blood pouring from my shoulder, Ward made it over to Maggie. She kicked and fought, but he outweighed her by at least 100 pounds. He pinned her arm behind her back with his gun in his other hand. Like hell I would let you have real bullets in your gun, he hissed at her. I bet Yates also had a handgun filled with blanks. I confirmed it by grabbing his weapon from his holster and firing it off to the side. Pain tore through my body, but I refused to let it overtake me. I needed to figure out a way to help Maggie. Ward pressed his gun to the side of her head, causing me to freeze. I felt as if I moved an inch, he would kill her. What a useless fed you are. I'll have to work on making it look like you all killed each other. But first I'm going to do what I wanted to that dead bitch with my coworker here. I've heard rumors they were sleeping with each other. No wonder our little Maggie snapped when she saw her little girlfriend's guts ripped out. I forced down bile at this man's words. I spotted a heavy glass paperweight and considered using it to smash his skull in. Maggie shook her head, scared to death and near tears. I didn't think she and Laura had been an item. She would have been more distraught if that was the case. But they may have been the only two women in the small town that loved the same gender. Such a secret, a heavy burden for a place like this. You killed a girl because you felt entitled to her body, you piece of shit? I spoke and did not hold back any of my hatred or anger. The gun was pointed in my direction. I refused to move to react to the threat. I just needed him to admit to his crime. I am fucking entitled. She owed me her body and her life. After everything I've done for this. Again, his words were cut off. A mist burst out of Yates' body, the gas swirling for a second then heading toward its target. Ward screamed and fired with no effect. He let go of Maggie just as the mist fell on him. She bolted, tripping over her own feet. We both watched in horror as the dark mist was absorbed into Ward's body without him being able to do a thing about it. His skin darkened and cracked. A set of large bat wings tore from his back, spraying blood droplets over the office. Ward's screams turned raspy as his body kept shifting. His face grew younger, and his skull shifted into a different person altogether. Instead of being overweight, his body shifted into a more built and broad-shouldered type. When the transformation was finally over, I stared at a version of the monster I'd spoken with inside the cell. Red glowing eyes landed on the creature's old body. After the mist left Yates' body, it shriveled up as if he'd been dead for a long time. Understandably, Maggie freaked out. She made a run for it outside, and the storm finally ended. I chased after her and it took a lot of convincing to get her back into a warm building until I could call someone to come and help. The creature that had been Yates locked himself inside the cells. Maggie locked herself up in the other office. My jacket appeared back on the hook, so I quickly called for some help. I was told to sit tight, and that someone would be by in a few minutes. My shoulder wasn't as bad as I thought. I felt a bit sick from the loss of blood, but I wanted to talk with the creature inside the cells. He stood in the middle of the small room, not reacting when I came inside. You discovered Laura first? After Ward killed her? I questioned, cradling my bad arm. He seemed like he didn't want to answer. Those red eyes were hard to read. She was still alive, but I couldn't do anything to save her. I exposed my wings because for a second I thought I may be fast enough to fly her to a hospital. She knew she wasn't going to make it. So, she offered her flesh to give me enough strength to destroy the town that rejected her. He answered in a calm voice. I should have been worried he wasn't finished with his task. I was a bit scared but had a feeling if he wanted to kill the entire town, he would have done so already. Maggie interrupted you. I saw Yates sleeping while we talked, so I assume you can leave the body you're possessing. Somehow, you let Maggie see Yates soon enough after seeing the monster she didn't think you two were the same thing. But you must have had an idea what kind of person Ward was. Why didn't you stop him before he killed Laura? I asked, the question bothering me. This creature had power. He used some magic to create a storm. Why not use it to save a girl? Did he not care, or was there a different reason? I could not act based on feelings. I couldn't even take over his body until he admitted to his evil. Yes, I knew he wanted to harm others. But if I was excused from punishment for killing a human based on my assumptions that he may kill in the future, then that would cause creatures to abuse that loophole. I hate the fact I arrived too late. He replied. Do you? We all turned to see Maggie at the door. I didn't know much she heard. Her face stained with tears and stress. You may not believe me. But yes. I only ate half of her body and therefore could only finish half of her final request. I am a monster that takes over sinful flesh. However, I did find it enjoyable pretending to be human and spending time working here. I looked between them unsure of their future. I wasn't certain if the corporation would arrest Yates, or whoever he was now for what he did. They may just give him a slap on the wrist and let him carry on. But Maggie might not be able to move on from all of this. The corporation did give humans the option to remove their memories of supernatural encounters. It may be better for Maggie in the long run. Before the agents arrived, I gave her my number so she could talk if she wanted. Having someone on her side made her feel better regardless of if she ever wanted to see me again. I once again was taken to the clinic to have my bullet wound looked at. Robin gave me a very disapproving look when I arrived. Since it passed through and didn't hit anything important, they didn't need to do much. A blood transfusion and some magic bandages fixed me up. Robin forced me to put my arm in a sling and I was told not to use it for another day. With some more warnings, I finally could go home. At least they dropped me off at my front door. I felt exhausted and just wanted to sleep. I got back in the middle of the afternoon, so that meant I had some hours of daylight left to nap. When I opened the front door, something felt off. Only one of Jackalope's shoes was near the front door, as if he kicked it off in a hurry. He always kept them in their place. Pesto hopped around the corner to greet me, followed by a stressed out Houdini. Rabbits are far smarter than people think. They heard the door open and came rushing over to get some help. I didn't take off my shoes. I ran into the living room. What I saw made me dizzy for a few seconds too long. My roommate had collapsed on the floor, the coffee table was knocked to the side. His hair down, covering his face. I rushed over to him, tossing off the sling I'd been told to wear to lift him to see the damage. His face pale as a ghost and barely breathing. I opened my mouth to say his name when his arm moved. The new arm came off his shoulder, sliding down his uniform sleeve. The flesh turned into a black sludge pooling into the floor. My sense of panic almost overtook me. I forced myself to call the clinic. I wisely saved the number. Robin answered and joked about me forgetting something when I left a few minutes ago. I barely could get out the words to have him send someone over right away to collect us. When he understood how bad the situation was, he had people in the door within the minute. 2 people took Jackalope as I followed. One person stayed behind long enough to put the rabbits away so they wouldn't go near the black substance now seeping into the living room carpet. I stayed at the clinic for the entire night. Robin kept saying Jackalope would be fine after treatment, and I needed some rest. I refused. My body was working on stress that made me pace the hallway outside the treatment room. My head pounded from the lack of sleep. When Robin came over again, I thought the creature had some sort of news. Instead, a needle went into my arm, and I passed out for a few hours. The jerk. I woke up angry but lacking the headache from before. At least Robin now let me see Jackalope after we both got some rest. The bandages kept some of the pain away, but my shoulder still ached. The pain in my chest walking into his room overshadowed everything else. He tried to sit up. I sat next to his bed telling him to stay laying down. I found a cup of ice water and helped him with it. Then we sat in silence for a few minutes, unable to think of anything to say. "I'm sorry," I broke finally, my voice a whisper. He should have let me die back then. I've had that thought countless times since he moved in. Seeing him in such a terrible condition only enforced my feelings. "I didn't give up my arm for you to be sorry about it," Jackalope replied, but his voice lacked any strength. "Robin told me that agents just wanted humans to live. Jackalope wanted to give up his life for my own. He hated seeing me distraught over his choice. No matter how much I wanted to feel grateful for what he'd done, I couldn't shake the feeling he made a mistake. I should be the one apologizing. I rushed things and asked for an arm too soon. They needed to create a custom one, but doubted they would be able to do so. I took the best option, stressed it out by using magic while at work, and ended up like this. I bet I traumatized the boys by passing out in front of them." He nearly died and he was worried about the rabbits. They were stressed out but would get over it. I wanted to point that out, but I decided against it. I worried just how long those 2 saw him on the ground unable to help. I should have gotten home sooner. They said they need the bed space. It's a miracle you're good to head home anytime you feel ready. I need to change your bandages, but that's it. I told him, thinking back to what Robin said before I rushed into the room. Jackalope sank deeper under the blankets. He wasn't very happy about how I needed to take care of him for the next few days. The last thing he wanted to be was a burden, even though he'd given up so much for someone as useless as myself. I could. Maybe call one of my old partners. "Hang out there. You're busy with work. I can't make you," he started. "Jackie, don't act like a child. I can take some time off for you." The nickname slipped out. I didn't even realize I said it before the embarrassment settled in. I wanted to slam my head against the wall. A redness started to creep up my cheeks, making me almost just get up and leave the room. "All right." The word came very softly from under the blankets. Somehow the nickname got Jackalope happy enough to go along with something he normally would refuse. I need to not let myself abuse this new power in the future. I left his room to let him get a bit more rest. I also needed to take care of some paperwork for both of us. As I sat in the lobby filling out forms, a person passed by I really didn't want to see. But I needed to talk to him about work. "Lupa, I'll be taking a few days off," I said, and the short man stopped walking to address me. "I've heard. You were injured again. It seems as if your shoulder and your partner should be healed on the same day," Lupa said, sounding a bit annoyed I was yet again taking a few days off. "Roommate." I corrected him but went on. "How is 10,006 doing?" I've been trying to get a hold of him but no one is telling me anything. Lupin needed to think about who I just asked about. He had so many agents under his care, he lost track for a moment. Yes, that one. He recovered and went into the field after you two worked together. However, that job was also too much for him. There were some complications. That agent is gone, Lupin said as if he just read out the weather and not announced the death of an agent. If I wasn't sitting down, I would have collapsed. When I didn't answer, Lupin gave me one last look to carry on with whatever brought him to the clinic. I don't know how long I sat in shock over the news. Those words repeated in my head over and over again. We hadn't been close friends, but I didn't want to believe he was just gone. My mind spiraled into trying to understand what I just heard. Is everything all right? Jackalope's voice drew my attention to him. He still looked terrible. At least he could stand and move around. All the color gone from his face, and his hair a mess. They must have given him vampire blood to heal up because I didn't remember him looking so thin before. I looked him over, my stomach twisting in guilt that I'd done this to him. I thought about his question and how to answer it. 6 was gone. Nothing should ever be alright after that. He'd lost an arm twice because of me. And I still hadn't found a way to get rid of that dark god before he finally latched himself onto my roommate. Yeah. I'm just tired. I somewhat lied. I felt tired as hell. I didn't want to think about anything. The only thing I wanted was to sleep. We arrived back home, and the living room was cleaned up by someone who worked at the clinic. Since I couldn't cook, I ordered something to force Jackalope to eat. Within a few hours, he'd fallen asleep, tucked into bed with a few extra blankets. I considered getting him one of those weighted blankets because he seemed to like being under so many of them at once. I collapsed into bed, my arm killing me from overuse. I didn't tell Jackalope about the bullet wound. He would have refused to come back home if he knew I was still healing. I slept for a few hours. In the middle of the night, I woke up with a weight on my chest. My body was too worn down to move. A dark figure sat, 2 flaming blue eyes staring down at me. The face got close to my own, letting a rotting smell come over me. 6 is dead because of you. If you saved him sooner, he would not have died on the second job. The voice hissed in a twisted version of my roommate's. I wanted to argue. My brain refused to do anything but agree. Your little friend rushed into getting a new arm and suffered for you. And because of what? What have you done? Adopted 2 rabbits that could have found a better home? Donated blood and yet you used more than you gave away? You have done nothing in your life. And now you're causing so much pain. You went from worthless to harmful. My eyes were open and yet I couldn't see anything. Those words created a pressure inside my chest that felt like it would burst at any second. I didn't have any strength to push the creature away. I just felt so damn tired. You should just. A sharp pain on my fingertips snapped me awake. I found myself standing in the bathroom in the dark. My hand flew to the light switch, leaving a smudge of blood behind. A few minutes passed for my mind to catch up. When I realized what nearly happened, I threw up my dinner. My disposable razor sat broken on the counter, the blade had cut into my fingers. It took me a very long time to stop shaking. I quickly gathered up the rest of the razors and stormed outside to put them all in the bottom of the trash bin. My cuts left blood I needed to go back and clean up. I was grateful that Jackalope didn't wake up from the noise. Guilt and shame wrecked my stomach. I couldn't face him after what nearly happened. In the morning I would call the corporation asking them to somehow God-proof the house. After everything others had given up for me, I needed to do the simple request and keep living. The God took advantage of my weakest moment, and I worried he may do so again. I work as a CSI. Part 8. A very simple reason. Jackalope was forced to stay home to rest for a few days after his body rejected his new arm. He needed help changing his bandages every morning, which I agreed to help. I put up his hair first, then went into the process of removing the day-old bandage to apply the new wrappings. You really don't need to go through this, Jackalope said the first morning. He was a bit embarrassed when I saw him without his shirt on. Aside from his scarred and raw shoulder, he had an old scar on his chest. It looked like an autopsy scar. I didn't ask him about it because I could tell it would be a touchy subject. Don't worry about it. I took care of my mother for 3 months before the end. This is nothing. What happened to your wrist? I asked to try and change the subject. He'd been wearing a wrist brace since he arrived home from the clinic. Robin didn't mention Jackalope hurt his wrist or ask me to look after it. He glanced down and shook his head. It's an old injury still healing. He refused to say more. The silence between us felt like a burden. The smell of medicine and wrapping bandages made me think back to when my mother was sick. She was more comfortable at home. We hired some nurses, but I mostly did the work. She refused to show how much pain she was in as she got thinner and thinner. I wondered why she got sick. It just didn't seem fair. My mother volunteered with so many different organizations. That woman acted like a saint and yet she died so young. My father also died too soon. The boy who shot him was just a confused kid. I wanted to hate him for making a mistake that took my father away, and yet I couldn't. I didn't keep track of what he was doing now. I think my father's killer regretted what he'd done and then cleaned up his life after he did his time. Even someone like him had done more for the world than me. What was your mother like? Jackalope asked, his voice snapping me from my thoughts. He didn't have a family, so he liked hearing about mine. Telling him stories passed the time we were both under house arrest to recover. By the second day, his shoulder healed up a great deal. Wit still stuck to the new morning routine of his hair being put up and shoulder treated. I caught his expression in the bathroom mirror one morning. He wanted to ask a question but wasn't sure how to say it. I pressed him until he let it spill. Are you not going to shave this morning? He asked slowly as if walking over a minefield. My heart nearly stopped. For a second I thought he knew the reason why I threw away the razors in the house. It soon became clear what was really bothering him. I'm trying out a new look. I lied. He made a face as if there was a bad taste in his mouth. My roommate was far too kind to come right out to say what he really thought. He just let out a small noise of disagreement and then looked away. I should be insulted. I just let the conversation die. After the razor incident, I started taking over-the-counter sleeping medicine. So far, they have worked. I hadn't come across any figures in the dark or woken up in the middle of the night. But I started to get stressed out over taking them for too long. I worried that Jackalope would be targeted if I didn't take the burden of the gods' attention until we found a way to get rid of him for good. By the time Jackalope recovered, I had a job waiting in my email. I never let him know about my sore shoulder, so he let me accept the work. I would be working with Farah, which made him feel better. I headed out promising to call if I wouldn't be home by dinner. I arrived in front of a fairly normal house in the middle of a pristine neighborhood. Farah waited out front. Her beads were a bright blue that matched her tie that day. She made a face the moment her eyes landed on me. What is that thing on your face? She asked, refusing to take a step closer. You don't like my mustache? I replied, trying to act offended. I don't know what that thing is, but it isn't a mustache. I feel sorry that Jackalope wakes up next to that. We're roommates. I corrected again. I really didn't know where everyone was getting these ideas from. It's not as if I acted like I made a move on my roommate. Just because we lived together didn't mean we were also dating. At this point, I think Farah was just joking around to annoy me. And it worked. I started to walk closer to the house, but her face turned serious. She stepped in front, blocking my way. It's pretty bad in there. I think you would be able to handle a body that got torn apart better than this. I don't want you to do this case if you don't think you're ready for it. She told me in a concerned voice. I'd been called to document a suicide. There had been an increase in them in the area. The corporation hired humans that were aware of the supernatural to look over suspect events to decide if an agent needed to be dispatched to the area. The human they hired also ended his life, causing the corporation to assume there was some sort of other force at work. The current death was a middle-aged man who didn't seem to have any reason to end his life. At least his family didn't think so. Farah knew about how rough the past few months had been for me. I was glad she worried enough about my mental state to double-check if I would be alright dealing with such a case. I'll be fine. I've done scenes like this before, I told her. She wasn't entirely convinced. She let me walk by her and into the house while staying close behind. We walked to the upstairs bedroom where the scene waited. A heavy air fell over us. Other than talking about the case and gathering details I needed to document, we didn't speak. Farah gave this job all the respect it deserved. I paused in my work to look at the body slumped against the wall. The gun landed off to the side. I needed to bag it but wanted Farah to do so. She needed practice. I suddenly didn't want to be near the weapon, let alone touch it. Soon I didn't have a choice. Her cell phone rang, making her huff out into the hallway to take the call. In a few minutes, she poked her head back inside. I'm needed for a job. How about you head home and let someone else finish up? She offered. I shook my head. I didn't have much left to do. I wasn't going to leave a few details to someone else. I can finish up here. You can go, I said. She gave me a long look, clearly not wanting to leave. Her phone rang again, showing she really was needed elsewhere. With a sigh, she turned away and made me promise to call her or someone else if I needed help or wanted to leave early. I got back to work after she left, wanting to finish this scene by dinner. I worked for another 2 hours on my own. The body my only company. I've never had any issues being around the dead before. For some reason, being alone in a room with a man who took his own life started to get to me. I noticed my hand shaking slightly as I made notes. I thought I sensed eyes on my back but ignored it. I didn't see anyone, so wanted to blame that feeling on nerves. The feeling grew the longer I stayed in that room. The tension was so thick it started to hurt my chest. "I know you're here," I said out loud, breaking the silence. A set of footsteps came from the doorway. Someone stopped in the doorway to rest a shoulder against the frame. Arms crossed, and a smug smile on his face. He looked like Jackalope, but how he looked when I first met him. Without the scars on his face, and both arms. The way he should be if we never met. "Are you the one who killed this man?" I pressed. I was stressed seeing this person. I didn't have any idea what kind of creature he might be. He didn't feel like the dark god I'd been dealing with. The lights flickered, leaving us in darkness for a few seconds. The only source of light came from the hallway. I didn't do anything besides talk with him. The creature spoke. He didn't really sound like my roommate. He tried, but there was something too smug about his voice. My hand hovered over my pocket, wondering if I should call for backup. If I did, this creature could kill me and leave. Or could get away before help arrived. I needed to keep him here until Farah came back. Or deal with him myself. "You must have done something more. This man had people who loved him and a support system," I said, and glanced over at the body. From everything I'd seen so far, if this man was struggling, he had options. And yet he was dead on his office floor. If things were this bad, why didn't he go to his family or loved ones? What did this creature do that pushed him over the edge? "Loved ones? Like how your father loved you?" the creature said, a wide smile appearing on his face. My stomach twisted in such an intense bout of guilt it nearly forced me to my knees. This creature must have some sort of power to increase the negative feelings a person may have. I hadn't felt this bad since the funeral. I shook my head, determined to not let him get to me. "He has nothing to do with all of this," I replied, but my voice turned weak. "I think he does. He became a cop because he wanted to protect his son, didn't he? He could have become a lawyer making all sorts of money, but no. You were nearly taken as a toddler, and he decided he wanted to protect others." The creature pressed, causing me to think of long-forgotten memories. There was an incident I was too young to remember. While at the mall, a man scooped me up and almost got away. My father caught up to him and nearly beat him to death. Afterwards, he found it hard to go out in public with his small son. To ease his fears, he shifted his career path to being a cop. He felt proud of the work he was doing. He died young, simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I often wondered if I hadn't been around, my father might be still alive. Or if I didn't wander off that day. "His death was an accident," I said, voice shaking. I never blamed the person who killed him because I took all the responsibility myself. The feeling of guilt and stress started to build up to an almost unbearable level, no matter how hard I tried to push it down. "And your poor mother. She slaved away in that factory to feed her little boy. Now, remind me again what she did. Grinded away some sort of galvanized steel? Doesn't that cause cancer?" The words hurt harder than a punch to the face. A grimace fell over my face as the memories of how my mother looked when she got sick came back. I shook my head, trying to get a grip on myself. In the back of my mind, I blamed myself for her death. Somehow, I found a way to blame myself for cancer. I caught myself going down a dark train of thought. These were just words. Just thoughts. And yet, my lungs started to close. I suddenly couldn't get enough air. I started to gasp while on my knees. The creature wearing my friend's face didn't move. That grin said all it needed to. The feeling of fear and dread those thoughts caused made my vision swim. I needed to get away, to call someone to come by and help. My breathing came fast and short. My hands shook almost too much to pull out my cell phone. My shoulders became so tense it hurt. I hovered a thumb over the dial icon, but my finger refused to move. "Now, who are you calling? Farah? Isn't she busy? Wouldn't her coming over here to save you cause yet another death? How many people have you killed? Your parents? Little Agent 6. The creature said, and suddenly was sitting in front of me. I didn't. I started, but the stress became too overwhelming to speak. My words died in my throat. This monster was just saying what I've kept to myself for years. I knew this is how it got under people's skin. The power he held caused my emotions to go haywire. No matter how logically I looked at the situation, it didn't stop how I started to feel. My body started shutting down from the stress. My chest hurt so badly that I thought I was having a heart attack. My vision became blurry, and I dropped my phone, unable to stomach holding it. The creature reached over to pick up the phone. His face changed slowly, revealing what it really looked like. Something twisted and ugly under the mask it wore. "Do you want to call your roommate? He would come here to try and save you. But I could talk with him as well. You don't want that, do you?" I shook my head as if that would remove all my discomfort. If I called someone for help now, I was convinced they would die. No, I needed to save myself. And yet, my brain refused to think of anything useful. A sharp pain came across my chest, causing me to clutch the front of my shirt. It forced me to press my forehead against the ground with tears threatening to start. "They all loved you. And that was their downfall," the monster said, the voice growing deeper. "Shut up," I replied through gritted teeth. "All of them are gone because of you. And for what? What have you ever done to repay them?" It hurt. My entire body hurt as if it was in a vice pressing down. I wanted it to stop. To just stop thinking about everything. No, I wanted my family back. But I wanted them to be alive and well without me. If I had never been here in the first place, the world would have been much better off. I didn't need a monster to tell me that. He was right, I hadn't done a single thing in my life that was worth living. I was scared of that fact, but also felt such regret as made me feel as if I started to sink into the floor. "There is a way to fix this." The voice changed to something gentle. Something cold was placed inside my hand. I didn't need to open my eyes to know what it was. Somehow, the feeling relaxed me enough to sit back up. He was right. I could do a very easy thing. Something I should have done years ago. My eyes still closed as a hand guided my own upwards. "Go on. It'll be quick," the voice whispered into my ear. For a second, it all just felt right. My finger on the trigger of a borrowed gun. I thought about how much easier it would be for Jackalope to only need to look after himself and the rabbits. He no longer needed to support someone like me. Everything would be so much better in the next few seconds. Another thought came. One that made all the others disappear. Who would put up Jackalope's hair in the morning if I was gone? That question broke through whatever spell the monster held on me just in time. I fired the gun and felt the hot blast so close to my face.
If I hadn't moved my hand at the last second, I would have blown open my entire face.
The creature let out a screech of fear and rage. It turned into a shriveled, gruesome body. It got on all fours to make a run for it, but I turned the gun towards the monster. By some miracle I hit it. At least 2 bullets tore through the weak body. I didn't think a simple weapon would be able to kill such a thing. But it let out another scream and then curled up like a dead spider. I sat, breathing heavily and hands shaking. I let the gun drop to the floor, unable to hold it any longer. I wasn't certain how long I sat in shock. My mind shut down from the entire experience. I'd been seconds away from ending everything. My phone rang, but I didn't answer it. I couldn't face anyone at that moment. Farah came back after an unknown amount of time. Her face dropped when she saw the scene inside the room. She stepped over the creature to help me to my feet. Her jacket was placed over my shoulders, and I was herded out of the room. She left me on the front step, shaking and staring blankly forwards. I knew she was calling someone, but the words didn't reach me. My mind went elsewhere. When I finally came back, she was sitting next to me saying something. "I never should have left you alone. We call those creatures a whisper, because well..." For a moment, I didn't understand why she looked so distraught. She couldn't bring herself to say what almost happened. That creature's whispers nearly convinced me to do something I could never take back. But it wasn't as if those were words I'd never thought of before. It just used how I already felt against me. If she knew that would have been a possibility, she would have never left me alone. A person stopped in front of us. I felt too damn tired to deal with him. "I am arranging some counseling for you after this event." Lupa stood in front of us, his arms behind his back and nose up over the idea I now needed even more time off. I assumed he arrived to make sure the creature wasn't faking its death. The monster was far too dangerous for most people to deal with. Why didn't backup arrive sooner? Carlos never should have been in there alone, Farah snapped at her boss. Her face twisted in an inhuman snarl. I didn't realize until then she only left because she thought someone would cover for her. Somehow, we already became friends without me noticing. She kept a hand on my back and I reached out to take her hand to calm her down. "He wanted to confirm if a supernatural creature was behind the deaths in the fastest way possible," I said in an oddly calm voice. Farah's mouth dropped open. She might have tried to maul Lupa if I wasn't there. Lupa was stronger than her, but that wouldn't stop her from attacking him. I wasn't upset at Lupa. I wasn't overly useful in the corporation. He saw this as a chance to finally use a resource. "I believe your victim complex was the reason why the Whisperer was able to appear in front of you." Lupa responded with his eyes narrowed. Farah was going to say something, but I squeezed her hand to keep her silent. Lupa ignored us to walk inside. We were no longer needed, so Farah saw me back home. Those magic doors sure were useful. Within a few minutes, I was standing in front of my house handing her jacket back to her. She made me promise a few times to call if I needed anything. If Jackalope wasn't home, she wouldn't have left. After I let her go, I walked inside smelling something familiar cooking. Jackalope found another one of my mother's recipes to try out. The rabbits were already put in their room for the night. I paused in the doorway, watching his back for a minute until he looked over. "Did something happen at work?" he asked. Jackalope could tell something was wrong. It would have been so easy to say everything was fine, and nothing happened. But Farah had his number. He would be angry if he found out about today through her. "Do you know what a whisper is?" I asked, and was shocked by how soft my voice sounded. He knew exactly what kind of monster I faced that day. I expected him to tell me to sit down for dinner and eat something, but instead, he turned off the burners on the stove. In a few steps, his long legs covered the distance between us. I wasn't expecting him to grab hold of me with his remaining arm to try and crush my ribs in a hug. I could have brushed it all off. I was a bit embarrassed he was making such a big deal out of something I thought I could just deal with. "You smell like gunpowder." His voice came low and soft near my ear. He knew what happened without me saying a word. The sense of guilt tore through my body again, and the dam I held back for so long finally broke. Unable to stop myself, I held him back as if the world would end if we were apart. "I'm sorry," I choked out. Within seconds, I broke down. My knees gave out as I cried those two words over again, unable to forgive myself. He nearly gave up his life for my own, and I nearly tossed it all aside. He only wanted to see me live. I almost didn't even do that. My body shook from the sobs. Everything hurt. I can't even remember the last time I cried, let alone that hard. I wasn't scared he might hate me for what I'd done. I already hated myself enough. No one else could beat me on that front. When I finally calmed down, he pulled away just to help clean my face. "I'll never be upset for you feeling the way you do. I'm just proud of you for coming back home." His gentle words hurt. It would have been easier to deal with him being angry at me. I shook my head, feeling miserable. "Go have a shower. I'll finish making dinner. After you eat, we'll talk. All right?" he said with an encouraging smile. "I'm really not," I started to say. "I'm not giving you a choice." Jackalope could be very forceful when he wanted. And I didn't really have that much fight in me. The shower did help a bit, and the hot meal did even more good. I almost felt normal by the time we were finished. Jackalope didn't stand up to gather the dirty dishes. We sat awkwardly at the table until he finally broke the silence. "Why didn't you tell me you weren't feeling great?" he finally asked, knowing the question was an understatement. I shrugged, unsure of what to say. "I thought I was fine. And when things got bad, I didn't want to bother you. I just was handling things until I wasn't," I admitted. "Are you finally going to take some real time off work to recover?" I nodded, knowing that Jackalope wouldn't let me work or do anything stressful for a while. "Lupa said I needed some counseling," I said, wondering when that might start. That's the first time I've ever agreed with that man. I didn't think it was possible, but I smiled. A small one, but it was progress. My roommate would also try and kill Lupa if he knew there was a chance I got put on that case for a reason. I wonder how long I could keep that fact hidden from him. I stood up to start clearing the dishes to keep my hands busy. My mind hadn't fully settled down yet. Jackalope let me get started on washing them as he watched from the table. "I want to go in and donate blood tomorrow. I think enough time has passed since the last time," I said as I started to try and figure out what else I needed to do to get my life in order. "Maybe you should take it easy tomorrow. You don't need to force yourself to be productive so soon after what happened," Jackalope suggested. I paused washing the dishes. The soapy water soaked the front of my shirt. I wondered how Jackalope washed these so often without getting water everywhere. I mentally scolded myself for not even being able to do the dishes properly. Then I got upset for thinking such a thing. "I want to stay useful. It feels like I haven't done a single thing," I admitted, but didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. Jackalope knew what I was talking about. I had already admitted how far this feeling went when we met for the second time. He knew I felt as if I didn't deserve to keep living. "You adopted Pesto and Houdini. And you let me stay here. On top of that, you're doing a very important job," Jackalope pointed out. A small spark of anger came up. I pushed it down, not wanting to be upset with him. "Anyone could do those things," I said as I turned around to face him. "Yes, but you're the one who did it. Such a simple thing." and I never let myself consider the answer. When we first met, Jackalope changed because I saw him as a person. Buying him his favorite candy was an extremely simple act but was enough to make him want to give up his life. I looked him over, thinking back to the reason why I pulled the gun away at the last second. He needed help putting up his hair in the morning. And I wanted to be the one to do it. That was enough of a reason to wake up each morning. Is it really alright I'm still here? I asked him softly. His lips were torn and scarred. And yet his smile was still perfect. Yes. Because I didn't get to hear what he wanted to say. A knock came at the back door, making us jump. I was closer, so I reached the door first. Neither of us had any clue who might be outside in the backyard at this time of night. I carefully opened it after turning on the backlight. The person standing at the base of the steps made my heart stop. It shouldn't have been possible, but he stood there and made an awkward wave. 6? I asked and flew down the 3 steps. He looked a bit different. His mouth almost looked like an insect. His eyes were fully black and a bit larger than before. His hands also looked as if he wore some sort of jointed plastic covering his fingers. You look terrible, he commented. It's been a rough day, I said, wondering just how much he might know. He made a face showing he wasn't talking about my emotional state showing on my expression. My mustache isn't that bad, I said once I clued in. It is that bad, 6 corrected. He then looked over my shoulder to nod at my roommate. Hi, Mr. Jackalope. Do you want to stay for dinner? We have leftovers. Jackalope offered from the door. 6 shook his head. He needed to be somewhere else, but Jackalope offered to pack a meal to go. He left to go back inside to do so and left us alone to talk. They told me you died, I said, looking him over. Oh right. Sorry. I sent a letter explaining things. It must not have shown up. My family is really strict. It's either being an agent or dead. A lot of my brothers fake their death to get away. The corporation goes along with it because they know how crazy our parent is. 6 explained. I never even considered that a possibility. I wanted to believe he was alive somehow, but my brain never thought of him faking his death. I was so glad he not only looked to be doing well, but forgave me for him getting hurt on the job we worked. Carlos. 6 started to wring his hands together. I wanted to thank you. For my entire life, I assumed I didn't have options. That my kind were agents that protected humans. But you were strong enough to protect me. And you've been doing so much to help even though you don't have magic to back you up. It made me think that I could also do other things. That maybe I would be more useful living a longer life doing something else to help instead of dying young as an agent. I was a bit taken aback by his words. This again was something I never would have thought I would hear. I didn't know how to deal with such a compliment. I just stood in front of him awkwardly trying to think of something to say. Jackalope came in to save me. He handed over a bag to 6, telling him he could keep the containers. The now ex-agent let out an odd chirping sound, very excited about a big home-cooked meal. What were you two talking about? Jackalope asked. I opened my mouth to answer but wasn't sure how to respond. I told Carlos I liked him. I think he needs to hear that from time to time. Hey, is it alright if I drop by more often after I get settled? 6 said without a hint of shame. 6 came from a huge family of brothers. Because of that, he found it easy to treat everyone like a sibling. I wished I had a younger brother like him, so I wasn't overly embarrassed by what he said. I like him too, Jackalope teased. I gave his arm a light punch for trying to embarrass me. We both told 6 he could stop by whenever he wanted. The fact he was alive and well lifted a massive weight off my shoulders. 6 thanked us again for dinner and promised he would be back. He was faking his death and needed to keep a low profile. So, we weren't sure when he would be able to see us again. After such a long day, I was exhausted. I needed a good night of sleep. But I doubted I would get one. Jackalope decided that sleep was more important than talking. In the morning we would start looking at some desperately needed therapy. Jackalope waited in the hallway until he saw me go into my bedroom. I was so tired I collapsed in bed, falling asleep in a few minutes for once. I wish I stayed asleep. I still had the dark god problem. I nearly forgot about him. He made it pretty hard to forget he still lurked in the dark. For some reason, he was done lurking that night. I woke up feeling pressure on my chest and neck. The dark silhouette of a person sat on top of me, and already had a set of hands wrapped around my neck. I tried pulling those hands away without any luck. The god far too strong for me. He wanted to end my life just as started to get on the right track to getting better. In the dark, I saw a smile appear on his face. A set of black teeth gleamed in the dark. I couldn't even scream for help. I scratched and kicked without any effect. Fear tore through my body, making it hard to react correctly in that kind of situation. Just before I passed out, the god was suddenly pulled off and tossed clear across the room. The creature let out a scream of anger and skittered up the wall on all fours. The thing looking at my savior with flaming blue eyes. I rolled out of bed while coughing. I would rather die than what I saw. Jackalope stood at the foot of my bed, glaring daggers at the god. I never wanted them to see each other again. Not after everything he already gave up. "What's this, my little bunny? Here to make another offer?" the creature said in a low, raspy voice. "We are not giving you anything else." Jackalope replied in such a stern voice it pushed the god back a step. I recovered enough to walk over to my roommate. I refused to let him face this creature alone. No matter how brave he wanted to appear, I knew he was scared as hell. His hand shook slightly at his side, so I took it. Having someone next to him helped. That god grin grew wider down towards us. "Nothing? Do you think you can get away from a god like myself? I'll leave you children alone, but for a price. How about that other arm to even things out?" A long laugh followed his words. My stomach twisted. I might be sick from the suggestion. I held on to Jackalope's hand as if I would die without it. I searched through my head trying to figure out a way out of this. Then it came to me. So far, the simple answers always work. "Get out," Jackalope said, beating me to my plan. The god's smile faltered. He no longer was getting under our skin. We may have been scared of him but refused to let that get to us. He no longer had the power he did before. "I am a god," the dark thing said in an angry tone. "And we don't give a fuck. Get out of our house," I ordered, my eyes refusing to look anywhere but that creature to make my point clear. A very long silence came between us. This monster could still rip us apart and be done with it. I had no idea what he could do, and that scared the hell out of me. A smile came back to his dark face. A different one than before. "I suppose this is also amusing in a way." The monster did not elaborate. It just started to sink into the wall to finally disappear, taking the darkness of the room with him. For the first time in weeks, the light from the street came through the window. I'd forgotten just how bright my bedroom looked at times at night. "That was a little scary," Jackalope admitted. His hand still hadn't stopped shaking. He stood up to one of his biggest fears for his stupid roommate that couldn't deal with his problems on his own. "I'm sorry. I thought I could get rid of him before he got this bad too," I admitted. Jackalope made a face in the dark. For a second I thought he was going to hit me. "How long has this been going on? Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded. I refused to tell him now that I got busted. He already knew I refused to burden him with any of my problems. And it nearly killed me. "I think I'm going to pass out," I said, and was only half avoiding his questions. After the adrenaline of dealing with that god faded, I lost all my energy. I suddenly didn't feel right and needed help getting back into bed. My eyes closed right away as my head swam in the dark. I heard Jackalope walk down the hallway, then come back. I thought he might be getting me a glass of water. A click came and I saw a hint of light from behind my eyelids. Then I felt someone slip next to me. I shuffled away as far as possible while still on my bed. Jackalope sat, looking about ready to crawl under my blankets to go to sleep. He even brought in his rabbit light. "I think it's best if I stay here tonight," he told me without a hint of shame. "But we're, you," I sputtered, unable to form words. "Grow up. Nothing is going to happen," he said, and finished getting settled. I thought it would be hard to fall asleep with someone next to me. I couldn't even remember the last time that happened. We were roommates. We shouldn't be doing this, risk of a dark god or not. Those thoughts ran through my head for at least 5 minutes before I passed out in the deepest sleep I'd gotten in months. I woke up hearing faint voices somewhere in the house. I sat up dazed and confused over what time it was. To my shock, I'd slept till noon. That was also new for me. Jackalope was gone. I smelled something cooking and that told me he got started on lunch. I crawled out of bed still in my sleepwear to walk into the living room. 3 people greeted me when I walked out. Nessie had been playing very gently with Pesto. He stooped to give me a crushing hug. Farah and Six needed to pry him away from. "You didn't tell me you dealt with a whisper. I would have stayed last night if I knew," Six said, offended when Nessie got distracted by a rabbit again. "When he heard that, he dragged us over to make sure you were doing all right," Farah explained. "I'm fine. Why would you bother coming all the way over here?" I asked them, my brain still working slowly due to sleep. "Because we're friends," Six pointed out. That was right. I knew we were friends, but it never fully clicked until that moment. These 3 cared about me. They didn't even need much or a reason to do so. They just wanted me to be doing alright. Jackalope came out to say lunch would be ready soon. His hair hadn't been put up because I slept so long. I gestured for him to come over so I could fix that for him. A few sets of eyes on us to watch. I gave them a look, daring them to say something. "Are you sure you're doing okay?" Farah asked instead of teasing. "Yeah. At least for now," I said with a small nod. "Good. Go and shave before lunch. I bought some new razors. They're in the bathroom," Jackalope ordered. The only time he missed his other arm was when he wanted to cross them to look somewhat bossy. I glanced between them all and scratched my face. I did want to shave but didn't think it was a big deal either way. "Is it really that bad?" I asked. "Yes." At least 3 voices replied. I loved these guys, but they could be brutal. At least I got the hint. I could still hear them chatting away while in the bathroom removing the offending facial hair. I found it hard to believe that only the day before I hit rock bottom. Now there were 4 people inside the house ready to support me in any way possible. After I finished washing my face, I looked at myself over in the mirror. I decided that it was a good thing I was still here. Even if that feeling only lasted a few hours, it was a very good start. I work as a CSI. Final. A marriage proposal. It turns out that getting a therapist is hard. The corporation had a few on hand, but they mostly dealt with supernatural creatures or half-breeds. Only 2 knew how to relate to humans. But I didn't connect with them. Nothing was wrong with that. Jackalope said it was best to find the right person instead of forcing getting better with the wrong one. It would still take a little while after I did find the right person to figure out if I needed medication or not. The entire thing was exhausting, but I did need to do it. If I didn't have Jackalope being so supportive, I would have already given up. Jackalope permitted me to do one job as long as 2 agents stayed with me. It turns out that all of 6's brothers were very protective of the one who befriended their family. I ended up finishing one job with 2 stern men wearing suits and sunglasses ready to attack any slight imaginary threat. I arrived home after a very long appointment. To my surprise, I saw Jackalope standing outside dressed in his suit. I hadn't seen him wear it since he first moved in. His tie wasn't fully done up. I went over to fix it for him before I questioned what was going on. "Who died?" I joked after I stepped away. He forced a smile on his face. I didn't like how he was acting, or what might be going on. I doubted he got hired back at the corporation. He would have told me. This was something else. I very soon found out when a crack echoed down the road. I flinched at the noise, but Jackalope was expecting it. A large dark carriage came racing down the street. The 2 large horse hybrid creatures made a sharp stop in front of the house. The back legs looked to belong to some sort of big cat. Each leg was scarred as if it had been stitched on. A deep scar ran across their necks, and it almost made it look as if someone attached the head of a white horse to a dark black body. "What's going on?" I asked, suddenly a bit scared of what just pulled up. Jackalope didn't give me an answer right away. The carriage door opened, and a large person stepped out. He was dressed in dark robes and at least 2 times my size. Gray tangled hair covered most of his face. But I saw his mouth lacking any lips grimacing in our direction. He gestured towards Jackalope to come over with one long gnarled finger. "A meeting with my family has been requested. They would like you to come along as well," Jackalope answered. He didn't sound like himself. His voice was like how we first met. I didn't like how he was forcing himself to appear calm. I looked between him and the monsters waiting for us. A feeling of fear started, but I refused to let him go alone with such creatures. I gave the tall monster another look over, wondering if somehow those 2 were related. "All right. Let's go," I agreed and started to follow him to the waiting carriage. Jackalope let his mask slip for a second. He wasn't overly happy I was coming with him. The creature held the door open for us. He then made his way to the front of the carriage to drive it to the next location. I really hoped my neighbors didn't see this. Normally supernatural creatures couldn't be seen by humans unless they wanted to be. Or were too weak to make themselves invisible to their main food source. The door was closed, and it shut out the world outside. The seats weren't too uncomfortable. A set of deep red curtains kept me from seeing where the carriage was headed. I felt it start moving, but oddly enough didn't hear the wheels or the horses outside. Jackalope sat across from me, not keen on starting up a conversation. "What is this all about?" I asked in a careful tone. He wasn't acting like himself. That stressed me out a little. "Do you know what a jackalope is?" he asked. The question made me pause. I've never really considered his name all that much. When I was much younger, I believed there were some horned rabbits somewhere in the desert, like a lot of children. A rabbit with horns, I guess. I replied to him. He gave me a somewhat tired smile. His name meant a bit more than he let on before. They're a hoax. A taxidermy animal pretending to be real. Something almost believable you could assume was alive. Before I had a name, my creator was torn between jackalope or Fuji after the fake mermaid. But I don't think I look like a Fuji. He explained. At least his hint of a smile looked real this time around. For a few moments, I didn't understand what he was getting at. Then I remembered the scar down his front. The one that made it look like he'd been cut open at some point. My body grew cold at the realization. I started but wasn't able to ask such a gruesome question. His expression was one I didn't like in the slightest. He smiled at my horror. Such a thing didn't suit him. My body was harvested from a deceased human. My organs are from a supernatural creature and my horns are from another creature. My name suits what I am. I was cut open, stuffed with something else, and a set of horns added to help with the hoax. He admitted, no wonder why Farah got so creeped out over the idea of him being created in such a way. I suppressed a shudder and needed to look away from him to collect myself. You have horns? I asked, trying to stay off the more gruesome topics of what he said. Another real smile came. He nodded and followed my gaze to the set of curtains. Most monsters could hide certain features. I never saw his horns because he never used his powers around me. I've heard jackalope wasn't stable magic-wise. If his organs weren't his own, it made sense he had issues using the power that came from them. I remember a little bit of who I was before. Not much. It's very vague, but I know I had a family. People who cared about me. Their names are gone, but I know they were there. And I turned my back on them, he said in a soft voice. He's never talked about any of this before. The fact he was now wasn't a very good sign. What do you mean? I asked a moment too late. I understood what he meant by turning his back on them. I had almost made the same mistake. I hated how that fact made me feel almost as much as I disliked his defeated expression. I ended my own life when I was a human. I no longer remember the reasons. But I don't believe it was justified if there were still people in my life supporting me. When I worked as an agent, I always wore a fake smile. I'm a dead man. That was my choice. I shouldn't be able to feel sadness or much of anything. The fact I have been enjoying myself recently is an insult to those I left behind. We sat and listened to the minor noises coming from outside. I wanted to reach out to him, but I knew he wouldn't accept any kind of comfort at that moment. He dealt with all of this on his own and I never had a clue. As his friend, I should have noticed how he felt. Would you have hated me if I never made it home? I asked him. I needed to fold my hands in front of myself to keep them from shaking. Jackalope looked up with a slightly horrified expression. He never would have been angry at me if I didn't pull the gun away in time. He would blame himself before me for my actions. Of course not, he said truthfully. Then why do you hate yourself for what you did? How come you can forgive everyone but yourself? I pointed out. He shook his head, unable to respond. His answer was the same reason why I still blamed myself for his missing arm. No matter how much others said it wasn't our fault, we simply couldn't forgive ourselves for our actions. I didn't realize that Jackalope had gone through so much the same things as myself. The carriage slowed to a stop. We weren't able to finish our conversation. The door opened and he walked out first. I stepped down to find we stopped in front of a massive Gothic mansion. The place was bleak and straight from an old black and white horror movie. I half expected a flash of lightning to appear in the gray sky. The carriage used some sort of magic to travel here. There wasn't any way this place was in the same country as we started in. Jackalope started forwards to the large wooden doors. I needed to half jog to keep up with his long strides. Another creature very similar to the one who picked us up stood by the doorway and watched us as we went inside. The main hallway looked dusty and old. Creatures peeked through the dark corners at us. All of them are a sewn together mess of other features. Jackalope may be the most human out of all of them. I followed him, the fear filling my limbs at the sight of the other creatures. He led us to a large room at the end of the main hallway. Instead of a tile floor, we stepped out into packed dirt. The room a large circle with an upper level. It looked a lot like a smaller version of a stage that gladiators may have fought in. From the dark stains in the dirt, I fear this place was made for that kind of purpose. Jackalope stood in the middle of the room and sat down on his knees. My legs would fall asleep with them tucked under like that, so I just sat in a different way that felt more comfortable. His head was directed to a small opening on the ground level. A chair was placed halfway out of the darkness. I saw a set of legs but didn't see who was watching us. It seems like my rabbit has finally come home. I never suspected you would show your face here after the disgrace of being fired. I suppose the mailing company is somewhat reasonable. I would have killed you if you didn't get that job. Now, what would a failure like yourself request a meeting for? The voice sounded female. She acted like a harsh mother, so I assumed she had been the one to create Jackalope. She cut open his dead body, stuffed it with organs, and forced him to work a dangerous job. On principle, I didn't like her. But I was shocked that Jackalope had been the one to request a meeting. It seems as if he kept his head down and working. His family wanted nothing to do with him. I would like to request you to disown me, he said in a stern voice. The women in the chair were a bit of a way away, but we still heard each other just fine. I understood why he no longer wanted to be a part of this family, but why ask now? Why not when he was first fired? His parent asked that question for me. Oh? Now for what reason do you wish to go off on your own? She said in a teasing voice. To get married. Jackalope responded, his eyes still facing the other side of the room. My brain shut down for a full minute. That didn't make sense. I kept looking between him and his shrouded parent as if an answer would just appear. Married? To who? Was he dating someone from work and he just forgot to mention it? Or was it an agent? Farah was out of the question because she liked other girls. I considered Nessie for a moment, but that didn't feel right in the slightest. As my thoughts ran a mile a minute, Jackalope lifted his hand. On reflex I took it. A slight tint of red came to his ears, but otherwise, his expression didn't change. I finally clued in with such a loud click in my brain I thought those two heard it. Did he want to marry me? Wait. Hold on. We just lived together. It didn't mean he actually liked me. I must be misreading this somehow. I didn't have a chance to question him. A shrill mocking laugh came from the darkness. His unseen parent thought his request was hilarious. I flinched at the sound. My body wanted to get up and fight the one who dared laugh at such a genuine request. Married? Someone like you? First, you bring disrespect to this family by being removed as an agent, and now this? Not a single creature in our world cares for you. Being so desperate enough to request to be disowned for a human. I cannot stand it. I'll do you a favor and have your other family members end your life here. Jackalope expecting this kind of answer. He shot to his feet, pulling me up with him. We weren't able to move from the spot. A creature dropped down from the second level. The lower half was a pure white snake, but the torso looked to belong to a human. The head, however, had been cut off and replaced with a huge crow face. Jackalope's parent created this monster with bits and pieces. The scars where the parts had been attached were visible on the body. I don't think this monster wanted to attack us. It just didn't have any choice. Two more creatures dropped down on all fours. One was a dog the size of a horse with a human face. The other slightly smaller. The body looked similar to an otter. A dark black wolf's head attached low to the neck with a fresh scar. I stood defenseless and scared as hell. I didn't have a weapon on me and Jackalope was missing an arm. We stood no chance against these monsters. Or so I thought. Because I'd been living with the kinder version of Jackalope, I'd almost forgotten he had been an agent for a reason. His face held no hints of fear. A spark of black electricity came from his chest. In a fluid movement, he reached over to grab hold of it. The sparks turned into a long straight line as he pulled it away from his chest. The power formed into a sleek black blade. Instead of keeping it, he tossed it over to me. By some miracle, I caught the new sword without cutting my hand. The two monsters backed off when they saw the weapon. They knew something I didn't. The next movement came too fast for my eyes to catch. I only heard the loud crack of Jackalope moving. For half a second he had been standing next to me, then he was across the room. He'd slammed the snake creature into the stone wall so hard cracks appeared up to the ceiling. More jagged black shapes came from his body. When he turned, I could see just how much he changed. A set of black horns came from his head. They flickered as if they weren't entirely solid. All the black energy around him crackled in an unstable way. His eyes landed on the other two creatures ready to take them down. I didn't know the end goal of this fight. He wouldn't kill the creatures that were forced to try to attack us. If we did escape, then we would be hunted down. I saw more eyes looking down at us and doubted Jackalope could defeat an army of these creatures. The creature with the wolf head peeled off in my direction. I only had seconds to react. I swung down the sword a bit too early. A burst of dark sparks came from the blade directly into the creature, pushing it back. Jackalope managed to also knock back the otter creature. Despite our progress, I doubted we would make it out alive. My hands shook in fear, waiting for the monster to recover or for another one to come down to attack. My fears were proven justified. Another snake-like creature dropped down hard near Jackalope. He didn't have enough time to get out of the way. The long tail caught his leg and slammed his body hard against the ground. I shouted out his name, scared to death about him. I swung the sword again like a bat to send more power in that direction. It landed on the target, pissing it off enough to let out a loud hiss and forget about Jackalope long enough for him to get up. He stood on uneven feet. A cut on his forehead dropped blood down into the dirt. Something looked wrong. His horns were crackling. His face twisted in a feral expression and a set of dark claws appeared on his hand. More of that darkness started to cover his legs, transforming them into something else. The otter creature tried to come up behind him. He slammed it with a powerful blow that embedded the poor things into the dirt. The sword in my hand shook. The wolf's head came closer, and I used the sword once again. After the final blast of energy, the entire thing broke apart, burning my hands and a spark flying up to cut the side of my cheek. Jackalope's power was becoming unstable. He was an agent and fought monsters for his entire life, but he didn't have control over himself in the long run. If we didn't get away now, we risked him attacking everyone, including myself. I saw him transforming into something else. His body hunched over as that black energy pouring from him crackled frantically. The sparks burst outwards, hitting the stone walls and exploding pieces off them. I nearly got hit by one of those bursts. The wolf-head creature made a run for it. The movement caught his eye. A somewhat focused amount of power was thrown in that direction, knocking the creature aside. He nearly killed it with one attack. He didn't want this. I knew that. These creatures were the same as him. But their bodies were weaker, and that made their power more stable than his own. The sound of the magic around us and the room slowly being destroyed was overpowering. But I still tried to reach him. "Jackie," I shouted over all the noise. A hint of recognition came to his eyes. A new monster jumped down into the fray almost directly on top of me. I covered my head with my arms, expecting to die in the next few seconds. Instead, I felt an arm wrap around my waist and a burst of wind hit my back. When I opened my eyes, I saw all the remaining creatures knocked out. Jackalope stood next to me, and his entire demeanor changed. His horns no longer flickered, and that black energy flowed around him instead of crackling. Somehow, he'd been able to stabilize his powers. To my shock, he leaned down to bring us closer. His head resting next to my own. "Please keep helping me," he whispered, causing my face to grow hot. "I haven't done anything. I'm just here," I admitted. "Sometimes that's all I need." He pulled back to show off his smile. Scarred face or not, his smile was perfect. Unable to help myself, I held him back a bit, convinced we might make it out here alive. How disgusting. I'd forgotten about his parent for a few minutes. The person he feared the most finally came out from the darkness. The human body we saw was nothing but a lie. A monster poured from the shadows. The body long with countless arms grafted on. The main head looked like a beautiful woman. Around it was a circle of other heads of creatures. All of them with dead milky eyes. This monster not only created stitched together creatures, but it added other parts onto itself to gain power. "You have no rights to this power. You were made to serve and nothing else." What an insult. What a disgrace. Those organs do not belong to you, nothing in your body does. I worked hard to find them and you owe everything to me. How dare you use it for your own gain? I shall put an end to this right now. The monster screeched. I knew this thing was stronger than both of us. I didn't want to die for once. But I didn't have any clue how we would be able to get out of this. There was no time to think. A light came from the creature's main mouth. Jackalope matched it with his power. They both attacked at the same time, knowing that energy exploding after hitting each other would cause a backlash that would kill someone here. At the last second, a crack of pure silver lightning came down between two blasts. A shockwave hit us all. I would have been blown off my feet if Jackalope hadn't kept an arm around my side to support me. When the dust settled, a new person stood between us. I stared at someone I never would have expected. "Would you care to repeat what you just said?" the newcomer said in an intimidating tone. He was the white-haired man that took over the hunter's case and the person I'd spoken with before. I dismissed him as being the Silver King when we met before. He acted too kind, but now his entire personality shifted. His red eyes hard enough to make the creature back down. "This boy of mine." It started in a weak voice. "From what I've seen, Jackalope has well paid back his debt for his life. He's worked an honorable job, and if he wishes to be removed from this family, I do not see why not. His body is his own. You did do a proper trade for the pieces that make him up, correct? Therefore, he does not owe anything. However, 35 years ago there was a rash of stolen organs. If somehow, he ended up with one or two, then surely, he would owe himself to the family affected by that death. If that isn't the case, then he should be free to go." The man spoke, and his word had implied a lot. If the creature refused, it would have been admitted it stole the parts to make Jackalope, if not all the creatures in this family. That would mean Jackalope risked having his organs returned to the other creature's family. And his parent would be arrested or killed for the crimes. But if the creature claimed to have gotten the parts in a fair way, then Jackalope could go free. He's worked enough to no longer owe his parent for his life. I saw the internal struggle on this creature's face. If it let Jackalope go, then the other creatures it made could follow in his footsteps. But if it didn't, it risked being killed by the Silver King on the spot. Yes. You're right. Jackalope has earned his freedom. He had worked enough for me to get back the worth of his traded organs. We were just testing him to ensure he was strong enough to leave this family. The creature lied. Then there is no issue. I wish to speak with him alone for a short while. There are special protocols when a creature becomes engaged with a human. It's best if we go over them. The king spoke and turned towards us. The creatures Jackalope fought were stirring. At least they would recover from the fight. We followed behind the white-haired man, and I gave one last look over my shoulder to that towering monster. Clear hatred showed on its attractive face. If anyone but the Silver King spoke to them, they might have just killed everyone in the room. We didn't leave the mansion. Instead, we ended up in a room off to the side. Cautious, the king finally broke his composure. "Look at how dirty you two are. You must have been so scared," he said in a voice completely different than how he spoke to the monster. Jackalope's horns faded, and he did look pretty rough from the fight. Cautious frantically brushed us both off. For some reason, our minor wounds healed along with the dirt being brushed aside. "Did you just?" I asked slowly as I looked at my newly healed hand. "I just helped you with the dirt. That's all," Cautious said as a huge hint to drop it. At least I was smart enough to do so. I don't think he could display any kind of favoritism and heal others for no reason. "Thank you. I wasn't expecting you to come in person. I thought you to be too busy, but you did save us," Jackalope said over to the man. Cautious smiled in a way that made him look much younger. Now everything made sense. Jackalope turned to me to start explaining what I already knew. "My parent." He started but wasn't able to get the words out. "I get it. Your parent killed and stole parts of other creatures to make all of you. Since being an agent is a respectful job, they must have seen this as an easy way to create a powerful family with a shortcut. I've been working on scenes with stolen organs. So, they just have started back up recently. When you heard what jobs I've been doing, you arranged all this to put an end to it." I commented. Both of them looked at me as if they didn't expect a human to put easy hints together. At least that was explained, but we still had a very important thing to talk about. "About the marriage thing." Jackalope stared, his voice clearly embarrassed. I needed to say something that would upset my parent enough to make them attack. "I'm sorry. I risked your life for something like this." Cautious looked between us, interested but not wanting to interrupt. "Did you do not mean the offer?" I asked slowly. Jackalope let out a nervous smile, refusing to look in my direction. It looked almost sad in a way. "Well, most people need to be in love with each other to get married," he pointed out. "Good. We got that covered," I replied without any hesitation. It took a few minutes for either of them to react. Jackalope kept trying to say something, but words failed him. My chest got tight, and I knew my expression looked as stunned as he did. "I need to step into the other room to scream for a few minutes," he finally admitted. "Take your time. I'll be here." We defaulted to sounding like business partners in order not to break down. He left so quickly that I thought I saw his heels kick up dust. The moment he was out of the room, Cautious came over to me to take my arm. He shook me, frustrated over what he just saw. "Why didn't you confess to him in a better way?" he demanded, sounding like a child. "I panicked," I said truthfully. I was still in shock and the full truth of what just happened hadn't hit just yet. Cautious was saying something but my brain refused to listen. I thought I heard him say that we needed a ring for this to be proper. Then disappeared through a door, leaving me alone with my thoughts, which were just internal screaming. Cautious came back before Jackalope. He placed something in my hand, and it made me crack a smile. I didn't have time to make fun of him for it. Jackalope came back into the room flustered. He had hoped we would have forgotten the whole thing in the few minutes he'd been gone for. I walked over to him and offered what the Silver King brought. Cautious said we needed a ring. I told him. Jackalope looked it over, wondering if this was a joke. "This is a ring, Pop." He pointed out the obvious. I panicked. Cautious admitted. Jackalope laughed, and I think it was the first time I heard him do so. I felt a little bit jealous that Cautious was the one who caused it. It felt weird having an audience for this conversation. Soon we didn't need to worry about it. A door flew open, and a large person walked swiftly over to the most important person in the room. Cautious tried to get away, but he was easily lifted over the shoulder of the newcomer. He wore a long trench coat that went down to his ankles. His face was just a tangled mess of vines with 2 eyes barely visible. "I'm taking this," the newcomer stated. He turned to carry away the struggling king. Cautious yelling back to us to call him for updates. With that strange scene over with, I needed to force on a more important conversation. I realized I was fairly close to Jackalope, which was embarrassing. But I didn't move back. "We really should get a proper ring. Before that, we should try dating first," I offered, already feeling a blush creep up my neck. I felt him take a hold of my hand, which didn't make it easier to deal with this whole ordeal. "I don't want you to go through this if you think you owe me in some way. I can't imagine how hard it'll be for you if we do make it official. I'm not human, and a guy. Some people tend to frown on both of those aspects. And He trailed off to look at the room we were standing in. He'd been made from stolen parts. He carried the weight of 3 lives. The one for his horns. Another for what was inside, and the final was the man who died for him to become what he is now. I wondered if he offered his life for my own that day because he just was tired and wanted an easy way out. Or he might have had no reason at all for such an impulse. "You're perfect." Another thing embarrassing to say, but he needed to hear it. His smile came back for a few seconds. Then tears started in his eyes. For his entire life, he never considered just living to be a possibility. Working as an agent meant he could have died at any time. Now he could take it easy in a perfectly normal house, doing reasonable work. The fact that someone would stay beside him after knowing everything about his past had been beyond something he ever hoped for. I let him bury his face into my shoulder. I carefully held him back as I thought why the hell this took so long. I've never really dated anyone. With my self-esteem issues, I didn't think a person could ever see me as an equal. I never even considered gender when it came to a partner. After everything, this felt right. When he pulled away, his face was stained with tears he rubbed away with the back of his hand. This was the second time I'd made him cry. I felt a little guilty about that. I wanted to make it up to him. When I leaned in closer to do so, he pulled back. That simple action caused me to spiral into thinking somehow I completely mistook everything we said so far. "My face is a mess," Jackalope explained, which ended my spiral. I showed him just how little I cared about a still damp face from tears. For a few minutes, I felt eyes on us and nearly died when I realized we weren't exactly in a private place to be showing any kind of affection. He agreed that we should head home before his parent found us and did something none of us liked. The carriage waited outside to take us back. The driver looked somewhat friendlier even though his lipless expression never changed. The entire ride back was awkward. We weren't certain how to react to each other after everything that happened. Sure, we nearly died, but that barely touched the mortifying ordeal of asking out your previous roommate. We acted like blushing schoolgirls for the rest of the day. It may have been easier to deal with if we didn't live with each other. Just as I thought I would be able to calm down a little, I was tricked. Jackalope wanted me to stay in his room for the night and promised nothing would happen. After the day he went through, I agreed. It was impossible to close my eyes, let alone try to sleep with him next to me. I stared up at the ceiling with the glow of the small rabbit light casting shadows in the room. His bed was far too soft with all the blankets, but very warm. "Do you want to make out?" he asked as a joke to break some tension. I gave his shoulder a light tap. "Yes, but I'm not ready for that," I answered honestly. I didn't know how much time that might take. I dreaded I might just shut down and he would leave me for someone else if I didn't get my act together. I looked over at him. His face cleared due to the small light next to the bed. "I don't think I'm good enough for all of this. I don't like myself." I admitted, getting serious because I thought he needed to hear the truth. "I can't see why you don't see all your good qualities," he answered back. "Lying at the start of this relationship?" I said in a falsely offended voice. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he said, matching my tone. "Gaslighting now too? I should have seen all these red flags before we got engaged." He wanted to keep the joke going, but the word engaged made his face twist back into a shy smile. He wanted to scream but held it in. "I am serious about how I feel. But I like who I am with you. All this right now is alright. I feel guilty for putting it all on you. I don't want you to think you have to stay here. You can leave if I become too much of a burden." All of that was also true. He wasn't going to be responsible for my mental state. I would never hold him down to make myself feel better. But I never considered he also needed me. A regular human might not see him in the same way I did, and if a creature found out how he had been made, they would be disgusted by it. "I like who we turned into," he said back. It had always been simple answers with him. He wanted to save my life because I gave his existence a second thought. I wanted to keep living to put up his hair every morning. It had been weeks since he moved in. I wasn't the only one being supported by him. He needed me around no matter how much I refused to see it. I knew if I spoke again, I would start crying. Instead, we both stayed next to each other watching the shadows on the ceiling for a few minutes. "Wanna fool around?" He half joked. He could be pretty demanding when he wanted to be. But that was alright. Sometimes you should give in to a demanding partner from time to time. It took a long time to get my home life settled. I needed to figure out my work life. Doing jobs in the field was almost out of the question. I came back with bullet holes too many times. Now I have a home to return to. I asked for a meeting with Lupa to go over some sort of arrangement. He agreed 2 days after the technical engagement. That was a fact I wasn't sure how to approach. Farah picked me up to bring me into the office. She could make a magic connecting door, but also a friendly face was always needed. Her beads were a bright orange that day. All the bright colors really suited her. She greeted Jackalope, who came over to the front door to see us off. "How is the shoulder doing?" Robin said to stop doing dangerous jobs and no one wants to see you in the clinic for a third bullet wound. She commented. "The snitch. Third time? When was the second time?" Jackalope said as if this was a murder investigation. "I don't want to talk about the second time." I replied as if I was on trial. At least he was letting it drop until I got back home. "You really need to tell your roommate important things," she scolded. "Fiancé." I corrected. The word took a while to sink in. When it did, she let out a screech and latched herself onto me. I nearly fell over the sudden weight. I heard a lot of "I told you so" for the next few minutes. Jackalope peeled her off so we could get my meeting done with. Farah wanted to tell Nessie right away, but we already accidentally broke the news over text and told her he was going to be our flower girl replacement. She needed to get her shrieking under control. The moment we stepped through the door and into the office, she snapped back to a professional agent. She led me to Lupa's office. This time I was a bit more confident dealing with the meeting. I walked through the small path to find the set of couches in the middle of the plants. Lupa sat with papers again. This time he didn't set them down when I sat. "I would like to stop doing field work," I told him. "Yes, that would be best. You appear to be somewhat of a liability. There may be jobs when we do have proper agents to protect a human like yourself. We can offer those to you when they come up," he said, sounding almost bored. I wasn't expecting this to be so easy. They needed my skills in some way. So why let me only do a job from time to time? Lupa kept speaking to answer my unspoken question. "We would like to offer you a teaching job instead. The agents get along well with you. It would be a better arrangement." I sat stunned. I never even considered that kind of work before. That would be perfect for me. But I had another question. "Why didn't you offer this to me before? I was shot. Twice." I huffed. He finally set down his work. A smile came on his face as if he had won some sort of game. "Do you think you had the confidence to do so when you first started working for us?" he asked. I was about to say yes, but the truth sank in. I would have rejected just a teaching job to start with. I would not have believed anyone should have listened to what I had to say. While on the field I did teach some agents, but I also did another job at the same time. It made me feel busy or as if I was doing something useful. Lupa saw through me. He might have known more about who I was than myself from the start. I hated how easily I got played. "I do understand why Jackalope doesn't like you," I said as a cheap shot. "I am not wrong in my assessments. I make the choices most cannot. I wonder why you could forgive the hunter and yet you do not like my reasoning." He answered back in an easy tone. He brought up a good point. I've nearly died twice because of him. He was the one who ordered Jackalope to suggest I spread the word about the Dark God. They did not have agents strong enough to stop the deaths. Lupa was willing to sacrifice lives to put an end to the deaths at some point. When he assigned the job with a whisper, he knew if I died then it would confirm something supernatural was at work. If they brought on strong agents, they would not have found the creature before it killed again. The hunter shot me and yet I forgave him. I saw some creatures as equal to humans and that man killed them. Lupa made calculated choices and the hunter acted on emotion. But they both had blood on their hands. I forgave him because he cares. I told him. Lupa gave me a questioning look but didn't appear offended. He shuffled the papers in his hands, somehow making the action threatening. A bold statement to claim I do not care about the lives of my agents. I want the best for them. And I must keep working. If we are all caught up, it's best if you head home to your new roommate. Lupa dismissed me. "Fiancé." I corrected on reflex. He didn't seem to care either way. Jackalope wasn't working for him and therefore meant nothing in his eyes. I started to head back through the path wanting to get home. I glanced over at the small creature. I'd met a lot of kind-hearted creatures and it nearly made me forget there were real monsters out there. I was glad that Jackalope got away when he did. I feared what would have happened to him if he stayed under Lupa's control for much longer. As I walked back through my front door and kicked off my shoes, I found it hard to believe all of this started with some strange deaths. I saw them through to stare directly into the dark. I became scarred from everything that happened and nearly lost my life more than once. Somehow, I got through the other side alive and doing better than before. There would still be bad days. For once I finally thought there would be more of the better days than the hard ones. I still had work to do. A lot more than I might even know. But I knew one important and simple fact. We're still here and that's all that matters.